All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's session, part one of Prevention Across the Lifespan, presented by Julie Stevens. Julie Stevens has been in the addiction field for 35 years and is an adjunct professor at the University of Oklahoma. She is currently member at large of the board of the International Certification and Reciprocity Consortium. She serves on the Texas Certification Board as chair of the Prevention Subcommittee. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items. Unlike other sessions, we will be using the Zoom chat/Q&A, not Whova, so please use the Zoom chat to engage with us. We will be looking through the leadership board and giving out prizes through the Whova platform for those engaging in the app. Please rate the session afterwards in Whova and navigate to LMS for the session's quiz and certificate. Now, please join me in the chat and welcome our speaker.
Well, good morning. You guys are an hour ahead of me here. I'm in Central Texas near Austin. And so it's pretty early here, very, very dark when I got up. It's starting to, I think the sun is starting to come out here now. But welcome. I initially intended to join you in North Carolina face to face. But with, these circumstances, I thought, well, I'll just do this workshop virtually. But I see that we have, 37, 40 people in the group. And by the way, when I look this direction, I am looking at another computer screen. I'm not over here playing Candy Crush. So don't worry about that. But I'm looking, at you and the chat box and all that over on the side. So that's what I am doing this morning. But I do want to welcome you to substance misuse prevention across the lifespan, and looking at what the issues are. I've been training for a long time, 30 years, I guess, on prevention. I was a licensed counselor, but I found out very quickly that counseling is not my gift. I'm not good at counseling. My questions are pretty bad, like just say no, and no wonder your wife left you, and those kinds of things that are not helpful to a client. So I thought I better do something else, and went into prevention and advocacy and training, and I really, really, really love it and have made it my life's work. What I would like for you to do this morning is turn on your camera so I can see you. And I'm wondering if some of you have been in some of my workshops before. Your names look familiar to me. And so I thought maybe you were, have been in any of my workshops. I also want to let you know that in the chat box, I have put, let me see if it's here, the handout for this, the participant workbook for this session. I highly recommend that you download it. We're going to need to, it'd be great if you could print it. I don't know if you can, but we will be working in it. And so you need to download it and have it there on your computer so that you can access it, because there's going to be, some information and some questions in it that we will be using today. We will be working for an hour and a half and then take a break. Hopefully, the break will be, our break will be at a really good place somewhere in the presentation. I don't want to stop in the middle of something that we're doing and break that up, but we'll take a break in the middle and then come back and finish 9 o'clock at noon, I guess, at noon your time. And then I'll do a little commercial. I'm doing another session this afternoon. And another commercial is, I think in the introduction, you were told I'm adjunct professor at University of Oklahoma for the Master's of Prevention Science degree. That is a fully legitimate University of Oklahoma university type master's degree. It's totally online. So if you're interested in looking at that and seeing what's available there, then I'll be glad to talk to you about it. By the way, I have a dog, and if somebody comes to the door, you may hear some barking, but that's the story of doing things virtually these days. So let's talk about prevention across the lifespan. What we will be looking at today is looking at the importance of a lifespan focus for prevention, because very often my dog got a toy. very often our focus is on, and the funding is for adolescent ages or younger than adolescent, and possibly up to young adult ages. And so we don't really look at the issues of prevention across the lifespan and the issues for older adults. And so the older I got, the more interested I got in that issue and began looking into it. So that's what we're going to look at today. We will also look at theories of human development as they relate to life transitions, because transitions are very, very important. And then we will apply prevention theories to practice across the lifespan. And we will identify additional available resources that relate to prevention across the lifespan. And so that's what we hope to do today. What I would like to do now is, if we had time, I'm looking to see, we have 50 people, so I don't think we do have time. But what I would love for you to do is, we don't often think about how do we get our name, and that's a pretty interesting topic. My name is Julie Carol Grant Stevens, and I don't know where the Julie came from. I was fourth of 5 kids, but the Carol, the middle name, actually came from the babysitter that my parents used when I was, being born in the hospital or other times. Her name was Carol, and she was a wonderful person, and she was a daughter of missionaries. And so I think that my parents probably thought, if we name her Carol, then maybe she'll be this wonderful person, like the babysitter was. So I don't know how that worked out, but that's how I got my name. So in the chat box, what I'd like for you to do, oh, you don't see the workbook? I'm seeing that you don't see the workbook. It's on the very top of the chat box. So I'm going to see if I can drop it in another way. Let me see about this. Pardon me while I go over here and drop it in again. There we go. Okay, hopefully you see it now. You got it? Okay, thank you. Kelson, I see you nodding your head. I appreciate that feedback. And so now tell us who you got, how you got your name. And I see Nicholas says he got his name. Everybody kept calling the older brother Nick instead of Dominic. So your mom just named you Nicholas, so that didn't happen. That's great. How some of the rest of you, tell me how you got your name. Are you named after, A Different World, a TV show? A TV show, that's funny. Sometimes, it's actresses, sometimes it's an aunt, or an uncle or a cousin or some family father's name. Grandmother, yeah, grandmother. Okay. Ellen or Elena, okay, so you can use English or Spanish, right? Name on a bread truck, Marita. Really, that's funny. Cousins, all right. Grandmother, Monique, nice. Grandpa Joe, mom's nickname, dad's for. So Deanna got 2 names. Faith, interesting. Ayman, Faith is in Arabic. Oh, very interesting. Okay, all right. So that's part of who we are. And Princess Anne, okay. All right. So sometimes you don't even know, where did my name come from? Where did my parents get my name? And then other times, definitely, it's the family focus and the family name. So we wanted just to take a look at that and see, and somebody's drawing on my, Willie, are you drawing on my PowerPoint here? Okay, so let's look at some more information about substance misuse prevention across the lifespan. Now, if you'll notice the term misuse instead of use or abuse, I changed it from abuse because our language sort of evolves. And in order, and you know, as you know, probably, you know, we're using the term substance use disorder instead of addiction. And we're also using the term substance use and misuse instead of abuse. So, you know, and you kind of change your paradigm in your head sometimes. This, I've been in so long that we've used many different types of language, but we want to be sensitive and not combative or confrontive about the language that we use. And so we're using misuse, use and misuse in this presentation. And, you know, that's something you might want to keep in mind when you're talking about substance prevention issues. But it's a new approach because very often, like I said, we look at substance prevention is also very often funded in silos. You know, we used to have a state incentive grant, and in that state incentive grant, we were encouraged at the state level to leverage our funding from different agencies. So if you have an agency that's on substance abuse, you may have a juvenile justice agency, you may have a health agency, you have an education agency. And so very often prevention is funded in these different silos, and there's gaps and there's overlaps. And so, you know, what's important is for us to look at prevention across the lifespan, but look at it not in silos. And, you know, basically, let's try to leverage our funding so that we get the most impact for the money that we're spending on it. So education needs to talk to mental health, needs to talk to criminal justice, and look at, you know, who's funding prevention, and are we duplicating services? Are we duplicating areas and target focus populations and those kinds of things? Because we can get more bang for our buck if we do coordinate and leverage funding. So, but that's looking at, you know, a lot of different funding sources. So, you know, it can cause some problems. So what I'd like for you to do is think about this. Why should we focus? Prevention across the lifespan? Okay, why should we do that? And what I'd like for you to do in the chat box, listen, guys, we're going to use the chat box a lot today. So I need you to be active and to participate. So what I'd like for you to do in your chat box is type in some reasons that you think that we should focus on prevention across the lifespan. Okay. Why is it important for us to look at prevention across the lifespan? Okay, right, Heather, active use can happen at any age. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Who else? There's some other reasons. Doesn't start and stop at a certain age. You're right. It affects all stages of development. Good. Triggers used to change throughout the lifespan. The needs change throughout the lifespan. The earlier you begin educating people, the more likely it is to, we go through different experiences. Very, very good. Anyone can begin use at any time. Yeah, we kind of, you know, assume that it begins in adolescence. Addiction is chronic, and prevention should be part of your life. Family, community, health, longevity, quality of life. Okay, because change happens at all stages, right? Right, and we have different issues that happen at all stages. That's correct. Anything else here? What else? Okay. The way you approach prevention might be different. Worked in long-term care facility, numerous families that would tell us that their parent was that the parent was addicted to pain medications. Yeah, and it can be a cycle. Triggering events can happen at any time in your life, right? That's true, though. That's true, and so you've mentioned many reasons that we need to focus on prevention across the lifespan. A couple more might be, you know, I don't know if you've thought about this, but guess what? We're living longer, right? Our lifespan itself is longer. We're living longer. So there may be issues that happen as, you know, the longer that we live, and around prescription medications, those kinds of things. We also are paying more. You and I as taxpayers, I mean, we're paying more for the issues that occur with substance use disorder, right? We're paying for health costs. We're paying for rising healthcare. We're paying for criminal justice costs that might be included in the issues that happen across the lifespan. So we're living longer. There's higher healthcare costs, and so there's prescription drug issues, and so we really need to look at prevention across the lifespan. Very, very important. Now, this is, by the way, is anybody, then raise your hand. You know, you've got this little reaction button down here at the bottom. All right, who's a certified prevention specialist? Who's already gotten their credential? Deanna does. Good. Who else? Who else does? Okay. All right. Is that just the one? Okay. Well, you know, my one of my roles is I'm chairman of the Prevention Committee for the International Certification and Reciprocity Consortium, and we look, you know, our goal is to I guess you could say create or help bring up competent prevention specialists. And part of competency is education and experience, and then there's an exam that you have to take. But what we have learned, and this is from the National Academies of Sciences, this continuum of care, and this is the actual spectrum of services that we provide in substance use disorder. So, and very often we think about, and there's a lot of funding for, and the substance abuse prevention block grant money provides 80% for treatment and 20% for prevention. But if we look at this continuum of care, we see, man, there's a whole lot that needs to go on before treatment, right? And so this is 2019. This is the latest continuum of care. You may have seen an earlier version of this that began with prevention. But what they've discovered is that we need to begin with health promotion. We need to look at our society, our community, and the individual and the family in health promotion. And health promotion are things like good eating habits, exercise, you know, those things that we need to do throughout the lifespan, throughout our whole life, no matter where we are on this continuum of care. So, excuse me, I've got a throat problem. So even if you're in treatment or you're in maintenance and recovery, you still need to practice forms of health promotion. Now, I hope you can see my little arrow. Let me bring my arrow up. If you look at this and you'll see this first darker blue line. Can you see my arrow here? Sort of, yeah. This dark blue line right here is where we begin to look at risk and protective factors, okay? So the first part, all the society, community, and health, everybody, that's everybody in the universe should be practicing health promotion, okay? But then once we identify right here on this darker blue line, health, risk and protective factors, then we go into, okay, which populations need which kind of services? And we have universal, selective, and indicated. Universal, let's see, I'm going to look in my booklet and see if this is in here for you. No, it's not. So universal prevention is our strategies that we use for the whole population. For example, all of the 8th graders in a certain school receive life skills training of some kind. So, and then when we look at the selective population, these are people who actually fall into an at-risk category, which is things like children of alcoholics, children of incarcerated parents, children are people who live in highly economically deprived communities. So there are certain risk factors that groups that this group falls into, but they haven't yet begun experimenting with alcohol or other drugs. All right, they are at risk for it. Then when you look at the indicated population, these are kids who have already begun, they're in the risk categories, but they've already started experimenting, perhaps smoking marijuana. It may be that they're truant at school. And so they're kind of very much at risk because of their behaviors. They have begun those behaviors. And then I'm going to show you this dark line right here. Okay, this is where there has actually been DSM-5 diagnosis of a substance use disorder. Okay, indicated these people, even though they're experimenting, they haven't gotten there yet. But the case, so that's when treatment begins. And you know, if you're a prevention specialist, you don't go over here into treatment because you're not licensed to do that. If you're licensed to do treatment, then certainly go case ID, treatment disorder, and then recovery, long-term treatment, and aftercare. So this is our continuum of care. And we want to, you know, pay attention to this because it's important for us in treatment. United States spends $89 billion on mental illness, on treating mental illness. But besides that, there's also all this and substance use disorder. So, but there's also all this loss of productivity. And so when we think about prevention, it's kind of a paradigm shift. We need to go in front of the problem, you know, and we also want to look at substance use disorder and mental health because you cannot separate those out. You know, which comes first, smoking pot or a mental illness? Or does pot cause mental, you know, so you can't separate them out. And so we need to be sure and look at mental illness, spectrum of services for substance use disorder and mental illness as well. Any questions? I'm going to stop here and see. Yeah, triggering events can occur. Yeah, so if you have questions or comment, I have no problem with you unmuting and, you know, interrupting me and making a comment. Okay. All right. I don't see anything yet. So what does this mean? First of all, I think this is really key in substance use prevention. A public health model, and this is a guide to prevention across a lifespan. Public health model includes three pieces. One is agent, host, and environment, as you can see on this slide. So prevention is a public health issue with a public health model, whereas treatment is a medical model, okay? But public health model means, and you're very familiar with, we're all very familiar with it right now. We're looking at COVID, you know, and that's certainly a public health problem. So the host is, you know, the organism that has the problem, you know, that has the issue or the disease. The agent is whatever delivers the issue to the host. And the environment is where does that problem thrive? Okay. So if we're looking at COVID, people who have it, you know, that's the host. The agent is the COVID itself, which thrives in various places in our environment. And so when you're looking at strategies with the public health model, and we'll just talk about COVID, what do you do? What type of strategies do you do with the host? Well, if somebody has the issue, then they're hospitalized and they're treated. The host also, we as folks need to get vaccinated. We need to wear masks. We need to, you know, not congregate and all those things that we've been told to do. The agent itself, the COVID, we try to reduce that problem by sanitizing, right? And then the environment, we try to reduce the agent by, you know, we're looking at access, we're looking at policies. There are policies, people must get vaccinated, they must wear their mask, you know, so that's sort of how the public health model fits with COVID. So if we look at alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, in the chat box, tell me, you know, what's the agent? What do you think the agent is if we're looking at ATOD issues? All right. The agent itself is the drugs. All right. It's the alcohol or the legal drugs or illegal drugs. The host, this is our population. The host in this issue can be people who are addicted, people who have substance use disorder. It can be casual users. It can be families. It can be children and individuals. So that's the host, whether or not they have an issue with substance use disorder. The environment is our community, and that is where the host, alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs thrive. All right, it's where there is access to it. So strategies that we use to address ATOD with the public health model is for the host, for children, we provide education, right? We provide life skills. For families, we provide parenting trainings and parenting classes. For those people who are experimenting or casual users, we do a lot of education. For those who have the disorder, we do treatment and education. So those are individual strategies targeted toward the host. For the agent, we do things like we label the bottles of alcohol that say how much alcohol there is in the bottle. We do interdiction, those kinds of things. For the environment, we look at policies, we look at access issues, and we look at norms, community norms. Is it okay in our community for underage drinking? You know, do we tolerate that? Is that a norm? We pass policies on age limits for purchasing, alcohol. We pass policies on making things illegal. One policy I can remember recently that we've done is vaping, because vaping has been here, a few years now. But when vaping came around, many cities and states said, as a policy, they said, okay, we're going to include vaping in our smoking policies. So if it says no smoking, that means no vaping here too. And so we want to change norms. We want to change access and availability, and we want to put in policies that encourage. And so through all of these things, there are opportunities for risk and protection in all three of these pieces. So when we look at risk and protective factors, and I think this is on page 3 in your workbook, so it's just at the very beginning. Risk factors can predict substance use. Protective factors can buffer the risk factors. They can occur in multiple domains. So that means they can occur in the family, they can occur in the individual, they can occur in the school, they can occur in the community, they can occur in society. And they can also have a cumulative effect. And so just basically, risk and protective factors is actually the very foundation of prevention theory. There are other theories in prevention. One is resiliency and one is developmental assets, but risk and protective factors has been the most researched and the most duplicated research. And, we know that if we address risk and protective factors, that those are very good strategies, evidence-based strategies to use in what we do. So this is on page 3 to 6 in your workbook. Lots of information about risk and protective factors. And you can see, like beginning on page 4 and 5 and 6, that there are risk and protective factors in different age groups. And so that's what we're gonna be looking at today. And on page 6, the greater the risk happens in multiple domains. The more risks are present, then the greater the risk, the more risk factors. And they can appear in all different races and cultures. And then our protective factors help to buffer exposure to risk factors. So that's what's important. So what we're going to look at is how does risk and protective factor perform across the lifespan? 3 different ways, 3 different things. We're looking at brain development, which are the biological changes in the human brain and the function of the brain and the capacity of the brain. And then we'll look at social development, which are changes in the way that we interact with our environment, people in our environment, opportunities in our environment, access in our environment. And then our changing web of influences, which is changes in the way that the environment impacts us as individuals. And so these are all ways that, particularly like the host, how the host interacts with various agents, infectious agents within the environment. And so it's all threaded together in the public health model that we will be looking at. I have a question for you, and that, how do you think that it changes across? How do you think that the risk changes across the lifespan? How does risk change across the lifespan? Each phase that we go through across the lifespan brings a new task that we have to accomplish. And so there's these risk factors that happen, but as each individual changes, the risk and protective factors can emerge and disappear over time, or they can express themselves differently over time. And so one way and to think about that, is what you're exposed to, very good. It increases, risk increases, and context matters. Hey, that's very insightful, Robert. Thank you for that. So think about drugs of choice, okay? And just, in the chat box, I'd love for you to tell me, how does the drug of choice change over the lifespan? How do you think drugs of choice changes over the lifespan? If you're in middle school, what's your drug of choice going to be?
What's accessible?
What's accessible? Okay, right. And so what might be accessible is what? Your alcohol in your parents' house?
Inhalants.
Thank you. Bingo. You win a prize. I don't know who's giving out prizes, but you win the prize because our drug of choice. So exactly. Children might be more interested in inhalants, and that might be the gateway to, to what they begin to use. And it might be what's available to them. So availability is definitely. And so, as you age, there may be other drugs of choice and other opportunities and other things that are accessible. Who said that? I mean, you win. I'm looking to see it because I couldn't see who said that, but that's true. Thank you for saying that. So yes, we are looking at drugs of choice. We, and also different children might react differently to some of the risk factors. There are also constitutional things that not necessarily in the environment, but in the individual. So the person might be like antisocial personality or something like that might occur for the kid. And there are limitations to risk and protective factor theory. And the main one, in my opinion, is it has mostly, I'll say mostly, I'll say always, been applied to school-age children. So most of the research with risk and protective factor theory has been applied to adolescents, to kids. So they're looking at school as a domain. Well, we don't have a domain as adults. Our domain would be workplace, but they didn't study that. They studied individual, family, school, and community when they looked at the domains. It's also, little research has been done on other age groups. And but it's logical for us to be able to apply the risk and protective factor research that's been done on school-age children to adults, but we still need more research, about that. We need to look at adults. So what I want to do now, and we're going to put you in some breakout rooms. In your breakout rooms, and this is on page 7. So on page 7 in your workbook, I hope you have paper and pencil. You can take notes. If you haven't been able to print your workbook, then download it, look at page 7 in your groups, and answer these questions. And they're written down there. Which risk and protective factors for youth might also function as risk and protective factors for adults? And then what are some other domains in adults' lives that could contain risk and protective factors? And then what other risk and protective factors might we suggest for adults? So we have 60 people. Is it Jessica, who's my tech person?
Yes.
So do you have, I guess, 60 people who want to do, let's do 6 breakout rooms. That way, when we process it, we won't be going so long. Or did I already tell you? Okay, will that work?
Yes, I'll go ahead and get it started.
Okay, so you're going to go in a breakout room. Please, here's what I want you to do. I want you to designate, I want you to discuss this, look at page 7, discuss this, come up with some answers, and then I want you to designate one reporter to report out for your group, okay? To tell us what risk and protective factors you came up with. Questions? Anybody have any questions? Okay, so join your breakout room and start discussing these questions. And we will give you, let me give you 10 minutes. So I have 9:37, so 9:40, I can't do the math, I'm sorry. 9:47, we'll come back.
Hi, Julie. Were you saying that the breakout room is closed at 9:45?
At 9:47, yeah,
Okay, thank you so much.
all right. So I'm waiting to see if we're all back yet. Patty Grant Edgman. Unmute. I want to talk to you.
Okay,
Yeah. So where'd the grant come from?
That's my mother's maiden name.
Okay, because that's my maiden name.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, so I thought maybe we were related.
Well, I'm half Cherokee and half Sioux.
Oh, okay. Oh,
And my dad, well, it was my dad's, that was my dad's last name.
what
From,
was Grant?
yes, Ernest
Where's he
Grant,
from?
Rosebud, South Dakota.
Rosebud, South Dakota. Okay. Okay. Just, it's not unusual, but it's just not out there that much. So I was
Right.
curious. All right. So it looks like we're back. So I want to ask, who's let me stop my video. Oh, I didn't want to do that. Wait. Sorry, I'm just trying to get all this technology done. So who's my representative from group one? Who's my reporter from group one?
Reluctantly, I am.
Okay, great, Kristen. Yeah, so did you find any more risk and protective factors for youth that also function as risk and protective factors for adults?
I mean, we kind of thought that there were a lot in the same. Like, for example, like supportive family, stable home and housing, environment, could be protective factors for both adults and children. And risk factors like poverty, bad influences, trauma, social media could also be risks for adults and children. But in some ways, some of them could also be like they can cross boundaries in a way. Some could be protective factors too.
Okay.
That was more on the question number 2 is what I was referring to. Like for but we can stay on one. I'm following your lead.
Just stay on one right now. Okay. And so tell me again, there were a few, go ahead, repeat what you said for number 1. That family, I'm looking at a list I have.
Okay, yeah, protective factors like the supportive family, stable home, stable housing, and like environment.
Okay.
And some of the risk factors were like poverty, bad influences, trauma, social media.
Okay, good. All right, thank you, group one. Group two, who's our spokesperson for group two? Group two. Jessica, who was in group two?
Let me check.
All right, I'll do it. I
Oh.
have trouble getting myself unmuted here.
Okay,
Um,
great. So group two, what I'd like for you to do is tell me, do you, the same question, which risk and protective factors function for both? Do you have anything different or new to add?
I have mental health and health issues, family history, social environment, education, access to healthcare, and socioeconomic class.
Wow, those are good. I really like the access to healthcare because that is definitely, I'm going to do social determinants of health, this afternoon. And that's one of the social determinants of health is access to care. So that's a good one. Thank you, group two. So who's group three?
I'll do group three.
Okay, what I'd like for you to do for group three is go to the second question and talk about what did your group talk about when you said, what are some other domains in adults' lives that might contain risk and protective factors?
Right. We said being a parent, stress in the workplace, imposter syndrome, and then again, physical health, whether that being chronic pain and access to medical health.
Great. Okay, super. All right, who's my group four person? I would like you to talk about the same question, group four. What are some other domains in adults' lives?
That's me. We spent all of our time on question one, but I'll say some things we mentioned in question one that could apply to question two.
Okay.
The community's attitude towards addiction and recovery, chronic stress.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Those could be, well, the attitude towards addiction and recovery could be a protective factor or a risk factor, depending on what that is. And then chronic stress would be a risk factor. Perhaps hobbies could be a protective factor.
Okay.
Yeah.
A couple of more that some other groups have said in there might be access to prescription drugs could be a risk factor that in the adults' lives. Working relationships. Oh, finances is also might be one. Life changes, empty nest. Some of those things are also risk factors in adults' lives. Thank you. Group five, where are you? I would like you to talk about the third question. Group five. So who has not talked yet?
Group 6 has not talked yet.
Okay, well, go ahead. 6, you can tell me what.
Okay, some of the things that we had down is lack of insurance, which limits them from being able to access services, family issues, health, mental health issues, financial problems, issues at work, like having a high stressful job, things of that nature. And some of the protective factors would be like family, support groups, community, religious, faith-based, things of that nature. Might be having a peer support group, like from work, things of that nature. Community supports, such as, and of course, services like through DSS, like Medicaid, food stamps, things of that nature.
Okay, great. Those are good. So who's a group that hasn't spoken? You would be group 5. Who has not reported out?
Sorry, I think we jumped right into discussion. I don't think we assigned somebody. But some risk factors for adults that we discussed were sort of the social role of alcohol in adult relationships. We also talked about brain development in the adulting brain being different from adolescence, and so some impulse control development, pre-executive functioning, those kinds of things. Transportation would be a protective factor, the ability to access different resources, but that could also be a risk factor with intoxicated, driving, and then access to find the substances that may not be available. So kind of risk and protective factor there. Anything else I missed, team?
Yeah, I think you hit it really well from group 5. One thing that I haven't heard though is access to healthy food. People who live particularly in rural and poor communities, or even in cities, they live in food deserts, and they might their closest food might be a convenience store that they're growing up on ho-hos, and definitely a risk factor.
That's a good one. Yeah. Well, a couple other things that some other groups have mentioned. One I think is very interesting is that this group is adults can be part of, you've heard of the sandwich generation. They've got to take care of older parents as well as their kids, so they're going both directions, and so that certainly could be one. Facing mortality was one. I don't know if you may have mentioned divorce or changes in families, structure, those kinds of things. And the other thing that I don't know if anybody has mentioned as a risk factor is media. The media and the promotion and the messages that we get through the media about, smoking, drinking, doing drugs, and those kinds of things also. And then social norms might be one. So these are some things, that we need to think about when we're looking at other generations. Okay, let me share this again. When we're looking at the older generation, which is what we're functioning. So basically, just to summarize all of this, we need to know where somebody is developmentally when we're looking at risk and protective factors, and that can help us in determining, where we need to intervene, what we need to do in intervention, and then how we can actually have the greatest impact on where we're going. So definitely beginning to shift our paradigm and to shift our thinking from adolescence to, okay, but there are these other issues around workplace, around family, around access to prescription drugs, around health, deteriorating health that we need to look at when we're looking at the older generation. And I'm trying to figure out, what do we call ourselves? All right. So I'm in this older generation. I can tell, you can tell if I've been in this business 35 years, then I'm ancient. So I want you to tell me, what do we call ourselves? Okay. Put in the chat box. Let me get my chat box showing here. Put in the chat box. What do we call ourselves? Do we call ourselves older adults? I think vintage is a good word. Classic is another one I've thought of. Mature, thank you, Troy. Definitely mature. We don't want to call ourselves ancient, the ancient generation, but there are different terms, I guess, that we could call ourselves. So I think it's fun to think about those. Seasoned is one that somebody told me once. So, oh, you did. Oh, okay. Thank you. You did put seasoned in the chat box. That's a good one. So, just thinking about that. Oh, change makers. I love it. I love it. That's a great one. Sorry about that. Yeah. And so anyway, I think that's kind of fun to talk about. So let's go. And, the first thing that we looked at was brain development. We talked about brain development. In your book, I want you to turn to page 8. Okay. I'm going to show you a video And on page 8, I want you to take some notes. And this is about the human brain. What is so special about the human brain? Okay, so there's some questions on page 8. And so kind of jot down once we go through this, but I think you're going to find this a very unusual video. Ready? Oh, no. Can you hear it?
What is so special about the human brain? Why is it that we study other animals instead of them studying us? What does a human brain have or do that no other brain does? When I became interested in these questions about 10 years ago, scientists thought they knew what different brains were made of. Though it was based on very little evidence, many scientists thought that all mammalian brains, including the human brain, were made in the same way, with a number of neurons that was always proportional to the size of the brain. This means that two brains of the same size, like these two of a respectable 400 grams, should have similar numbers of neurons. Now, if neurons are the functional information processing units of the brain, then the owners of these two brains should have similar cognitive abilities. And yet one is a chimp, and the other is a cow. Now, maybe cows have a really rich internal mental life and are so smart that they choose not to let us realize it. But we eat them. I think most people will agree that chimps are capable of much more complex, elaborate, and flexible behaviors than cows are. So this is a first indication that the all brains are made the same way scenario is not quite right. But let's play along. If all brains were made the same way, and you were to compare animals with brains of different sizes, larger brains should always have more neurons than smaller brains, and the larger the brain, the more cognitively able its owner should be. So the largest brain around should also be the most cognitively able. And here comes the bad news. Our brain, not the largest one around. It seems quite vexing. Our brain weighs between 1.2 and 1.5 kilos, but elephant brains weigh between 4 and 5 kilos, and whale brains can weigh up to 9 kilos, which is why scientists used to resort to saying that our brain must be special to explain our cognitive abilities. It must be really extraordinary, an exception to the rule. Theirs may be bigger, but ours is better. And it could be better, for example, in that it seems larger than it should be, with a much larger cerebral cortex than we should have for the size of our body. So that would give us extra cortex to do more interesting things than just operating the body. That's because the size of the brain usually follows the size of the body. So the main reason for saying that our brain is larger than it should be actually comes from comparing ourselves to great apes. Gorillas can be 2 to 3 times larger than we are, so their brain should also be larger than ours, but instead it's the other way around. Our brain is 3 times larger than a gorilla brain. The human brain also seems special in the amount of energy that it uses. Although it weighs only 2% of the body, it alone uses 25% of all the energy that your body requires to run per day. That's 500 calories out of a total of 2,000 calories just to keep your brain working. So, the human brain is larger than it should be, it uses much more energy than it should, so it's special. And this is where the story started to bother me. In biology, we look for rules that apply to all animals and to life in general. So why should the rules of evolution apply to everybody else but not to us? Maybe the problem was with the basic assumption that all brains are made in the same way. Maybe two brains of a similar size can actually be made of very different numbers of neurons. Maybe a very large brain does not necessarily have more neurons than a more modest-sized brain. Maybe the human brain actually has the most neurons of any brain regardless of its size, especially in the cerebral cortex. So this to me became the important question to answer. How many neurons does the human brain have, and how does that compare to other animals? Now, you may have heard or read somewhere that we have 100 billion neurons. So 10 years ago, I asked my colleagues if they knew where this number came from, but nobody did. I went digging through the literature for the original reference for that number, and I could never find it. It seems that nobody had actually ever counted the number of neurons in the human brain, or in any other brain for that matter. So I came up with my own way to count cells in the brain, and it is essentially consists of dissolving that brain into soup. It works like this. You take a brain or parts of that brain and you dissolve it in detergent, which destroys the cell membranes but keeps the cell nuclei intact. So you end up with a suspension of free nuclei that looks like this, like a clear soup. This soup contains all the nuclei that once were a mouse brain. Now, the beauty of a soup is that because it is soup, you can agitate it and make those nuclei be distributed homogeneously in the liquid, so that now by looking under the microscope at just 4 or 5 samples of this homogeneous solution, you can count nuclei and therefore tell how many cells that brain had. It's simple, it's straightforward, and it's really fast. So we've used that method to count neurons in dozens of different species so far, and it turns out that all brains are not made the same way. Take rodents and primates, for instance. In larger rodent brains, the average size of the neuron increases, so the brain inflates very rapidly and gains size much faster than it gains neurons. But primate brains gain neurons without the average neuron becoming any larger, which is a very economical way to add neurons to your brain. The result is that a primate brain will always have more neurons than a rodent brain of the same size. And the larger the brain, the larger this difference will be. Well, what about our brain then? We found that we have on average 86 billion neurons, 16 billion of which are in the cerebral cortex. And if you consider that the cerebral cortex is the seat of functions like awareness and logical and abstract reasoning, and that 16 billion is the most neurons that any cortex has, I think this is the simplest explanation for our remarkable cognitive abilities. But just as important is what the 86 billion neurons mean. Because we found that the relationship between the size of the brain and its number of neurons could be described mathematically, we could calculate what a human brain would look like if it was made like a rodent brain. So, a rodent brain with 86 billion neurons would weigh 36 kilos. That's not possible. A brain that huge would be crushed by its own weight. And this impossible brain would go in a body of 89 tons. I don't think it looks like us. So this brings us to a very important conclusion already, which is that we are not rodents. The human brain is not a large rat brain. Compared to a rat, we might seem special, yes, but that's not a fair comparison to make, given that we know that we are not rodents, we are primates. So the correct comparison is to other primates. And there, if you do the math, you find that a generic primate with 86 billion neurons would have a brain of about 1.2 kilos, which seems just right, in a body of some 66 kilos, which in my case is exactly right, which brings us to a very unsurprising but still incredibly important conclusion. I am a primate, and all of you are primates. And so was Darwin. I love to think that Darwin would have really appreciated this. His brain, like ours, was made in the image of other primate brains. So the human brain may be remarkable, yes, but it is not special in its number of neurons. It is just a large primate brain. I think that's a very humbling and sobering thought that should remind us of our place in nature. Why does it cost so much energy then? Well, other people have figured out how much energy the human brain and that of other species costs, and now that we knew how many neurons each brain was made of, we could do the math. And it turns out that both human and other brains cost about the same, an average of 6 calories per billion neurons per day. So the total energetic cost of a brain is a simple linear function of its number of neurons. And it turns out that the human brain costs just as much energy as you would expect. So the reason why the human brain costs so much energy is simply because it has a huge number of neurons. And because we are primates with many more neurons for a given body size than any other animal, the relative cost of our brain is large. But just because we're primates, not because we're special. Last question then. How did we come by this remarkable number of neurons? And in particular, if great apes are larger than we are, why don't they have a larger brain than we do with more neurons? When we realized how expensive it is to have a lot of neurons in the brain, I figured maybe there's a simple reason: they just can't afford the energy for both a large body and a large number of neurons. So we did the math. We calculated on the one hand how much energy a primate gets per day from eating raw foods, and on the other hand, how much energy a body of a certain size costs and how much energy a brain of a certain number of neurons costs. And we looked for the combinations of body size and number of brain neurons that a primate could afford if it ate a certain number of hours per day. And what we found is that because neurons are so expensive, there is a trade-off between body size and number of neurons. So a primate that eats 8 hours per day can afford at most 53 billion neurons, but then its body cannot be any bigger than 25 kilos. To weigh any more than that, it has to give up neurons. So it's either a large body or a large number of neurons. When you eat like a primate, you can't afford both. One way out of this metabolic limitation would be to spend even more hours per day eating, but that gets dangerous. And past a certain point, it's just not possible. Gorillas and orangutans, for instance, afford about 30 billion neurons by spending 8.5 hours per day eating, and that seems to be about as much as they can do. 9 hours of feeding per day seems to be the practical limit for a primate. What about us? With our 86 billion neurons and 60 to 70 kilos of body mass, we should have to spend over 9 hours per day every single day feeding, which is just not feasible. If we ate like a primate, we should not be here. How did we get here then? Well, if our brain costs just as much energy as it should, and if we can't spend every waking hour of the day feeding, then the only alternative really is to somehow get more energy out of the same foods. And remarkably, that matches exactly what our ancestors are believed to have invented 1.5 million years ago when they invented cooking. To cook is to use fire to pre-digest foods outside of your body. Cooked foods are softer, so they're easier to chew and to turn completely into mush in your mouth. So that allows them to be completely digested and absorbed in your gut, which makes them yield much more energy and much less time. So cooking frees time for us to do much more interesting things with our day and with our neurons than just thinking about food, looking for food, and gobbling down food all day long. So because of cooking, what once was a major liability, this large, dangerously expensive brain with a lot of neurons, could now become a major asset, now that we could both afford the energy for a lot of neurons and the time to do interesting things with them. So I think this explains why the human brain grew to become so large, so fast in evolution, all the while remaining just a primate brain. With this large brain now affordable by cooking, we went rapidly from raw foods to culture, agriculture, civilization, grocery stores, electricity, refrigerators, all those things that nowadays allow us to get all the energy we need for the whole day in a single sitting at your favorite fast food joint. So what once was a solution now became the problem. And ironically, we look for the solution in raw food. So what is the human advantage? What is it that we have that no other animal has? My answer is we have the largest number of neurons in the cerebral cortex, and I think that's the simplest explanation for our remarkable cognitive abilities. And what is it that we do that no other animal does, and which I believe was fundamental to allow us to reach that largest number of neurons in the cortex? In 2 words, we cook. No other animal cooks its food. Only humans do, and I think that's how we got to become human. Studying the human brain changed the way I think about food. And I'll look at my kitchen and I bow to it. And I thank my ancestors for coming up with the invention that probably made us humans. Thank you very much.
Oh, wow. What did you learn here? So look on page 8. And you can, you can unmute or you can put in the chat box. How much does the human brain weigh?
1.2 to 1.5 kilos.
Yeah, and I don't know what, how that, I think it's 3 pounds, in American terms, I'm not sure. Does anybody know? Is it about?
Yeah, a kilo is 2.2, so it would be like 3.5, 4 pounds.
Okay. Okay, I wasn't sure. So, and then how much of the body's energy does the brain use? Troy says 25. You mean 25%? Yeah, right. Right, good. And how many neurons are there in the human brain?
An average of 86 billion.
86 billion, yeah.
Okay, and then how many calories does the brain use?
500.
All right, so it uses 25%, yeah, of the energy. And how many neurons are in the cerebral cortex?
16.
16 billion, right? And how many hours a day does a gorilla need to eat to maintain?
8.
Yeah,
8 hours.
right. And so what do we do as humans that frees us up?
Cook. Cook.
Right, so that's our advantage. Have you thought about that? Have you ever thought about what cooking does for us?
No, I really haven't.
It keeps my wife happy.
What, Joe?
It keeps my wife happy.
It keeps her in the kitchen.
No, keeps me in the kitchen.
Oh, keeps you in the kitchen.
That's right.
Well, somebody's got to do it, right?
That's right.
Oh, that's hilarious. Oh, that's funny. I never thought about this till I saw this video. I teach a class, the Masters of Prevention Science at University of Oklahoma on lifespan. And this is the video that we use in that class, to teach when we talk about the human brain and the information. So cooking frees us up to gives us more neurons per brain than any other animal, and so that ain't primate, and so that's why we're able to do what we're able to do as human beings. And I don't know what Darwin would think about it, but she was pretty funny about that. So and you've studied this. I'm sure you've studied this before. That during childhood, prenatal and during childhood is when the brain is beginning to develop and it wires up. The brain regions are beginning to develop, and then all those connections are being made neuron to neuron. And this is a part where like use it or lose it. When it's wiring up, if you don't utilize parts of the brain, then it prunes. It's called pruning. The brain prunes itself away from and those connections and those neurons that you're not using are pruned away. And then adolescence is the age of reasoning, and so this is when higher thinking is beginning to develop, and the beginning, not completely, but the beginning of controlling emotions, and the beginning of judgment, and beginning to make associations between consequences and actions. But we know that, until age 25, the brain is really not fully developed. And so the pruning happens when the brain is developing, and the myelination happens during adolescence. And that's when the myelin sheath, on the axon is thickening, and it makes all of the signals go faster. And so, it's a very integral part of the brain development. And then in adulthood is the age of, plasticity, biological adaptation in responses to new. So when we have new experiences and new changes, then the brain develops there. And if it's like a habitation, that means the brain is only focusing on new information. So what happens with, anybody want to talk about what happens when kids begin to use alcohol or drugs at an early age, when it's wiring up, the brain is wiring up, instead of the brain focusing on algebra, and English and history, it's focusing on substance use. And if you're a counselor and you've ever counseled a 35-year-old person who has a substance use disorder, developmentally, they may be 15 or 18 or something like that. So in terms of brain development, when we're looking at use it or lose it on those ages, and then the pruning happens, and this is just a recap, we still have lifespan experiences that determine which synapses will grow and which will die. So questions about brain development. This is the first of the 3 things we're going to look at when we looked at the agent, host, and environment, the public health model for substance use. Any questions or comments about the video? Yeah, I never thought of cooking in these terms, but I think the funny thing about the end of that video was, you know, what do? We cook and then we gain weight and we eat fast food and stuff not good for us. So what do we do to compensate for that? Is, well, we go back to the raw vegetables and the raw fruits and things. So that's ironic that that's what we have to do because of our cooking and our gaining weight. Any questions or comments at this point?
So fast food is the cause of the decline of the human race?
Yeah. Is that what you think she means? Fast food is a cause of the decline. Fast food, you know, obviously is something that's very handy and convenient for us, but it's probably not really good for us to survive on fast food.
Yeah, I would highly recommend, there's a book called This Is Your Brain on Food, which does a really good job of sort of weaving in mental health and substance use disorders and how nutrition plays a role for either healing or interrupting those processes.
Oh, okay. Wow. Hadn't heard of that. That sounds like something interesting and would really weave in here at a good place. Okay, I tell you what, we're a little bit early, but I'm going to pause here because this is a good place to stop during the presentation. I don't want to get started on the next one. So Jessica, what do we do? 15 minutes for a break and then we come back?
Yeah, let me go ahead and check the calendar, but we're supposed to stop around 10:30 and I think we'll be back at 10:45.
Oh, well, so it's what, 10:23 now?
Yes.
Can we come back at 10:43? Okay, well, let's just come back at 10:45. That'll work.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Okay, we'll see you at 10:45.
Okay.
Welcome back to Julie Stevens' session, Prevention Across the Lifespan. As a reminder, unlike other sessions, we will be using the Zoom chat and Q&A, not Whova. So please use the Zoom chat to engage with us. Now, please join me in the chat to welcome back our speaker. Thank you, Julie.
Welcome back. Hope you had a nice break there. We're going to look at the second thing that influences us in our development. The second one is social development, and this is basically where we need to understand, you know, the different levels of development in order to understand where transitions occur, in order to understand where to insert different strategies. So we know that individuals are at highest risk during those transition periods. You know, and you probably, if you've worked with adolescents, you know that the transition between elementary school and middle school is key, and therefore we put our strategies around 5th grade, and then transitions between middle school and high school are key, and so we put strategies in the 8th grade, around the 8th grade, in order to help with that transition. Kids going from being a big fish in a small pond to being a very small fish in a much bigger pond, and there's a lot of challenges and risk that take place during those transition periods. And so if we know developmentally, you know, if we know the developmental age of the individual, which is maybe not exactly the same as their chronological age, then we know, you know, where to put the transitions, or where to put our strategies. So what I want to do now is get you involved to think about a time in your life that was important to you, that was a transition time. And this is sort of a time machine type activity for you. And we want to look at the goals. What goals did you have during that time? What activities did you do? What were your responsibilities? What, people were around? What type of objects were around? So turn to page 9 in your workbook. And let's see. So we're going to put you in the same breakout rooms is fine, or 6 breakout rooms will work. And share with each other in your breakout rooms your time machine activity. And maybe you will find that you had some similarities during that time, some of the same issues during that time, and just talk about what specific time in your life that was very, very important to you. And then what were the components of that? And so these are on page 9. You'll see the instructions. When you finished it, share with people in your room. Perhaps there were some similarities or differences. And, how have your priorities shifted over time, and how could this relate to your social development and your prevention needs at that time? Okay. Any questions? All right, please join your room. Let's give you another 10 minutes. So we're going to say to be back out at, I guess it's 10:49 your time. So you're right at 11 your time. Okay, can we bring them back?
Yeah, bring them back.
Thank you. Did you see my note?
I did. So would you like 2 for each category essentially?
Right.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have a couple of rooms that haven't joined us back yet.
I think we should have everyone back.
Is everybody back? Okay, because I see like 46 people. All right, so welcome back. So let me get this going. What I'd like for you to do is tell me in your breakout rooms, and I'm just going to ask for volunteers. So please just unmute yourself and tell me in your breakout rooms, like what common themes did you come up with for this activity?
Well, with my group, there's several people. Their goal was to graduate high school at age 18, to enter college, to graduate within 4 years, not on the super senior plan. And after graduation, get a job and go on with our careers, our prospective careers. The similarities with some of them were, you want me to go into the similarities?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. The similarities with some of the other members was positive reinforcement in lieu of punishment, because we're a little bit older. So us old schoolers know what it is to get our behinds tied a little. And that's always, yeah, me too. And that's always, that always works things out if you were raised in that era where parents were allowed to be parents, not punished, not abusing, but just as a form of discipline,
Right.
I think that was the funniest thing that I can remember, because we talked a little bit about that and laughed about parents telling us they brought us in to take us out, so that priorities shifted a little bit as we got older. I know with myself, it was more of, I had to realize that I couldn't save the world, because when you're younger and you go and you get in certain fields, you want to help everybody. You want to, but as you get older, you have come to realize that you just can't save everyone, you can't, and you have to learn to take time out for yourself, let this.
So you went away. I think your audio stopped. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so, I think like I said, as we went forward in our careers, a lot of us had to learn to basically take time to smell the roses, take care of our health, our mental well-being, because when you're dealing with certain populations, we always feel like we're carrying the world on our shoulders. Sometimes you take it personal when someone that you work so hard with fails at their as achieving their goals. So, and learn how to basically deal with your personal stressors,
Yeah.
and focus on health a lot, our health.
Right. That reminds me of people point out when you get on an airplane and they're giving you all the instructions for safety and they say, put the mask on yourself first.
Yeah.
Before you put it on your children or anybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got to take care of yourself in order to be healthy enough to help other people.
Others, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's something that we all had to learn. I don't think we really learn that until we get old and start having other health issues. So I think that's a big that's shifted to me.
Right.
So.
Good. Thank you. Thanks very much. Anybody else have any anything you want to point out, anything different from in your group that you want to talk about?
In our group, it seemed like we were focused more on having our children and completing college and employment. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So graduating high school, going to college, children and employment, family and employment. Important, very important on this time. Okay. Right. Good. Okay. Thank you. So when we're looking at transition periods and social development, we look at where to intervene. So a transition is like a change from one state or subject or one place to a different one. It's a development. It's an evolution into a different style. And transitions can be very discreet and clear. So like we've got high school graduation is very clear. Marriage is very clear. Job is very clear. Death of a parent or a spouse is very, very clear. Hang on. I'm sorry. Or besides being very clear, it can be a slow and gradual thing like adolescence. The period of adolescence takes, a few years. Brain development takes a while. And so transitions can be clear cut or they can take a while. And so, okay, here's what we just talked about. So the types of transition periods are individual and ecological. Individual is our biological, our sense of self, our cognition, brain development, body development, physical development. And ecological is what happens outside of us. It happens in our environment and it's a change, in our role. But both of them involve a new status. Both of them involve something outside, that is legitimized by our social environment. They're very important, and they can have a long-term impact on our well-being. And so turn to page 10 in your book. Erickson looked at individuals. He looked at different stages and what needs to be achieved during each stage and during each transition in order to be healthy when we transition to another stage in our lives. And they can be discrete, division points. And so, but if you get stuck in those areas, according to Erickson, then you won't be healthy and you won't move to the next stage of development. And so you can see on page 10, he has the 8 transitions, 8 ages. Actually, he has a 9th one. And there's a book that he and his wife wrote and I've got, I'm looking up here because I've got my bookshelves up there, about a 9th stage, and it takes, and it looks at the stages age 80 and beyond age 80. So he actually came into, decided there was another stage. But what he says basically is when we look at substance abuse, what happens is we experience a conflict, conflict X, whatever. And if you're not successful in resolving the conflict for that stage of life, then he says it leads to discomfort. And, you don't want to deal with it. The substance that you're using might change your experience. And the substance, you might begin drug use in order to resolve the discomfort that you have, which temporarily works. There is a temporary relief, but then the discomfort returns because it's not a full-fledged resolution of the conflict. And so, when you're looking at prevention, we look at this, for example, ages 7 through 12, childhood, and their issue is industry versus inferiority. And so it may be that there are stressful tasks that are created by the conflict that need to be removed. And our risk factors might aggravate it. Our protective factors might help resolve it. And so and this is an example, ages 7 through 12. So there's this conflict that happens, and we have to, at that age, there's increased responsibility, increased academic standards. The risk factors that may come into play here: low commitment to school, academic failure, transitions in mobility, which that's the transition from elementary to middle school, and early antisocial behavior. And so what happens then when they go from the childhood to the teenage years, age 12 through 18, and they don't resolve these conflicts, then it can lead to inability, to complete the task, and a lack of their own belief. So effective prevention practices need to focus on these transition periods, educating and intervening at that age. Now, here's my issue. Education and individual strategies and life skills, those kinds of things that we do in schools are effective, but they're not complete. So there needs to be environmental strategies. We looked at agent, host, and environment. The host is the education piece where we teach kids skills, life skills. But the environment piece is where they live, and that is messages they get from the media, access to drugs, and and things. And so that environment piece needs to really be focused on as well. So we can help them make a smooth transition. And so if we do that, if they do have effective prevention practices, that transition can be much smoother. Relevant protective factors are opportunities, skills, and recognition here. Now I'm going to insert something that's not in my slides, but I really, to me, it's very, very important. It's a social development strategy. And social development strategy says, and it's developed around risk and protective factors by Hawkins and Catalano, who did the first research. But what it says is you begin to identify a child's abilities, interests, talents, and you give them opportunities, skills, and recognition in those areas. Okay, so opportunity skills, you give them lessons, whatever, art lessons, piano lessons, music lessons, sports, if they're interested in sports, computers, whatever they're interested in, you give them opportunities, skills, and recognition, which means they will bond to whoever gives that to them. So if it's a family, then they will bond to that family. And then once they bond to that family, they will adopt the healthy beliefs and clear standards of that family, which results in healthy behaviors. Okay. An example, I have a son who, when he was 10 years old, he saw the movie Top Gun. From that point on, oh my gosh, he wanted to be a pilot. I mean, he was just totally focused on, oh, I want to be a pilot. And he's 10 years old. He had model airplanes, posters with airplanes, books about airplanes all over his room. So I'm thinking that's a good thing. You know, he wants to be a pilot. I'll give him opportunities, skills, and recognition because, you know, I'm already a prevention person. We gave him flight lessons when he was 14. He went to college and majored in aviation science. He came out of college with, you know, a pilot's license, airport management license, mechanics license, instructor license out of college. So he was an instructor for a while. And he is a pilot today. He is a pilot today. Guess where? He's a pilot for the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration. He flies Mexico and Central America. He flies criminals to Guantanamo Bay. He flies drugs from Central America to be incinerated in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So he today has done that. My message to him all growing up was, you can't be a pilot if you do drugs. So opportunity, skills, and recognition of those healthy things. And guess what? If he gets it from the wrong people, like a gang, he bonds to the gang and he adopts the behaviors and the beliefs of the gang, unhealthy behaviors. And so that's why, you know, I can talk on and on about social development strategy, but opportunity, skills, and recognition are so very important. And so what let's see if we're going to do this in, we are going to put you back in rooms and look on page 11 in your workbook, in your small groups. I'm going to give you some stages of development, but we're going to go to older stages by Erickson. So you can look at your Erickson. So I want 2 groups for stage 6, which is your 20s. And this is young adult versus intimacy and isolation. And then 2 groups for stage 7, middle adult. And then 2 groups for stage 8, 50s and beyond, older adults. And in your small groups, answer the following questions, and these are on page 11. What stressful tasks must be overcome by members of your assigned age group, according to Erickson, and what risk and protective factors make these tasks better or worse? So Jessica's going to put you in group. Please remember your, I don't know, Jessica, if you put them in groups by these age groups, stages 6, 7, or 8, or what you're gonna name the groups, but.
Oh, yeah. So I have them named after like middle adults, older adults, and young adults, if that's okay.
That's perfect. That is perfect. So yeah, so there's going to be 6 groups. 2 groups are doing each stage. So in your groups, discuss what stressful tasks must be overcome and what risk or protective factors you have. I'm going to give you 7 minutes to do this, okay? So we'll take them back at 10:25. I'm 11:25. Ready to bring them back?
Just started. We should have them back in 30 seconds.
Thank you. Welcome back. I put a handout of the social development strategy in the chat box if you're interested in just looking at it. Okay.
I think you may need to repost it because I think it doesn't let you access the chat until everybody's back in.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll do that in a second. So group, young adult group, one of the young adult groups, please report out and tell us what stressful tasks that you see for that age and then risk and protective factors.
Wow.
Talked about a few different things, including this is the time where most people are kind of maybe finding partners, establishing careers, identifying new relationships. Maybe your friends that you grew up with or that you went to school with are no longer next to you. So you're finding kind of new friendships. And some protective and risk factors are maybe your ability to trust in others, you know, sense of security and maybe who you are, your self-esteem, self-confidence, your ability to get a job or a career. So maybe that plays into maybe the color of your skin or your gender or your education status.
Good. Right. Good deal. Thank you. So my second group for younger adults. What did you report? How can you report? Second group, are you there?
I'm not sure what group we were in.
Oh, young adults, the young adult group.
We didn't see anything come up as to what group we were in, so we just picked one.
Oh, what did you pick?
We picked middle adulthood.
Okay, well, go ahead and report on that.
Yeah, so we felt like some of the challenges that would be present just would be how we might be governed by, you know, specific policies or things like that that would be in our work environment. And then also just the family breakdown in our lives, perhaps during that time of life, going through empty nest time, stressing over, you know, trying to achieve it all in those areas, and financial income being affected. And then just not achieving the goals that we might have set early on, and the disappointment that brings, and just the reality of losing loved ones by that time of life.
Right, that's true. Very good. Is there another middle adult group that can report? Did you have anything different or new? No.
Some of that was very similar. I think we also said just the difficulties of juggling all of the balls that are in the air for raising children and caring for your parents and contributing to meaningful work. And then also the stepping back from the ability to make your needs central, being more challenging. And so some protective factors would be like having a community to distribute some of those responsibilities to, so that they're not necessarily falling on the adult alone. And then the economy and just what's going to happen for your career and transition can be protective. So if you're in a solid field that isn't as much at risk, that's sort of a protective factor.
Okay. Great. Yeah, how many of us, got a degree, a college degree, and then ended up in a job totally different from whatever your college degree, your college degree was, you don't know when you're 18, 19, 20, really what you want to do. So I go to college every 20 years, I think. I go when I'm 18, 20. And then I went again when I was in my 40s, and then I went again when I turned 60. So 3 times been to college. And you just as you live and you realize what you're interested in and what you go with that. So okay, so who has my older adult group? Please report out.
I'll go. Our group talked. So Erickson says, you look at your life accomplishment, you deal with loss, and you prepare for death. And we find that is exactly what we see, is that people start thinking about what they're going to leave their children, their final preparations, and just dealing with loss of friends and family members. And then they have to think in terms of like, how do they engage in the community if they're not working, to finding meaning and purpose. And since they don't see their family as much often, they have to learn to engage with people in new ways, like, volunteer groups or senior centers or whatever.
Perfect. That's great. I haven't told you, but I do live in a active adult community is what it's called. But it's a retirement community. It's Sun City community. And there are a lot of opportunities for actively engaging, volunteer opportunities for that, but you got to seek them out, and you don't live with your family necessarily. So older adult groups often deal with depression, loneliness, and then your physiology changes, physical inadequacies and health declines and loss of mobility. And so protective factors are those things that you talked about opportunities to volunteer and getting out and engaging with people. So very good. So this piece in terms of our stages and our transitions is real important, and it might be something that you had not thought about when we talk about lifespan and we go beyond the young adult stage and into older adults and middle-aged adults. You might not have thought about these things, but you're coming into them, you may be coming into them, but it's important for us to continue our prevention strategies beyond young adulthood and continue into middle adulthood and to older adulthood, because we definitely need prevention in those ages, because we're definitely risk factors for those ages, risk factors that we don't necessarily look at for the younger ages as well. And then the third thing that we would look at is our social ecological model, our web of influence. And when we're looking at this, this impacts us, and it looks at interactions between the individual and then these 3 other external contexts that are in our lives and that can result in substance use behavior, risk behavior, mental illness type behaviors. The first level, is individual. And so those are the biological things that we possess, personal history factors. If we're a victim of violence, a victim of abuse, those kinds of things that happen at these age. And so we're looking at things like education, substance use, history of abuse. And then when we look at our families and our relationships, because this is how we broaden, our influences broaden into family. And so we're looking at peers, intimate partners, family members, circle of the closest circle of family members and peers that we have that contribute to a range of experience. And the community piece, if we go out farther, is looking at schools and workplaces and neighborhoods, where our social relationships occur, and looking at characteristics in the community that might contribute to substance use. And then we look at society, the largest level out. We're looking at culture. We're looking at the climate that substance use grows in our society, health, economics, education factors, policies, pollution, war and violence, those kinds of things that happen in our society are definitely influences on us. And that, by the way, is on page 12 in your workbook if you want more information about this social ecological model. It's very, very important we look at that because we learn from, and this is Bandura, he's my favorite, I told you the social development strategy is my favorite strategy, but Bandura is actually, I think, my favorite psychologist theorist because he looks at self-efficacy in a child or in a person. And self-efficacy is the ability to be your own agent and not take on the behaviors of parents or peers, and not, in other words, not blame yourself for other people's actions. So self-efficacy, and sometimes it's you're born with it, and sometimes you can learn it. So he says that, what influence our behavior, because he looks at social development strategy, social development theory, and, looking at the actions of others. And if you've seen the Bobo doll experiments, anybody raise your hand if you know what I'm talking about the Bobo doll experiences. This is Albert Bandura, where he put kids in a room and there was a television on, and the television was showing an adult beating up the Bobo doll. Remember, the Bobo doll is that thing that falls over and then comes. And so then he put the kids in a room with the Bobo dolls, and the kids did the same thing. They beat up the Bobo doll because they had observed adults doing it. And so, he says you pay attention to things in our environment. You look and you see what's going on, and then you retain those things. And media, if you think about media and commercials and messages that are in movies, you see things, you see a glamorous person doing this, you retain it because it's shown over and over again. If you ever watched the Super Bowl, you see those same commercials, and then you reproduce it. So you do it, and very often you're validated because your friends think it's cool that you're whatever, smoking, vaping, whatever. And so you're motivated to continue to imitate those things that you see. So that's what Bandura says in our social development theory. And so what we look at, and this is on page 13 and 14, is, how can we collaborate, and how can we work with all of these influences that we have for prevention strategies, in our prevention strategies. And those things can be, we can intervene at different age groups. We can focus on different abilities and problems that the web of influence shows. And so they're looking at also, and that you saw this before in your continuum of care and your spectrum of mental health services, universal, indicated, and universal, selected, and indicated strategies. And so in terms of universal, we would look at a strategy for that would be, would be something that you apply to everybody in the group. And this would be workforce development strategies, self-efficacy programs, parenting programs, media campaigns, community coalitions, community collaboration. And then selected strategies would be those things, remember, for people who fall in an at-risk group. And that can be policies that reduce social isolation, education policies around programs around drugs and drug interactions. And then indicated population, we need, I don't know if you've heard of expert screening and brief intervention and referral to treatment. That's where you have somebody that you suspect has an issue. And so you do a screening for them and refer them into treatment. And so those are some strategies that you use for indicated populations. And so when we look back at this whole thing, oops, I look back at this, we need to understand that there's a lot out there that influences us and our behavior and the behavior of the people we work with. It's not just, so there's not just one strategy that needs to work. So let me go back here. Here we go. And some of you have already, answered this. This is my question. What do we call us? What do we call older people? Antiques. And some of you said, what was it? Some of you said it was so funny. So Victoria's asking me a question. I want to go back to this question. So what would I do if my son was a daughter? Well, if she was a daughter and she wanted to be a pilot, I would do the same things. If there's other issues, if she wants to be a dancer, if she wants to be a soccer player, if she wants to be a computer programmer, or if she wants to be an engineer, any type of exposure to those things, lessons for those things for a daughter, and now I'm seeing on TV how females are the, place kickers on football teams, and they play on football teams. So any opportunities that you could give, and let me just say this about my son and his desire to be a pilot. One time when he was a teenager, he got a traffic ticket, okay? And so he went to teen court and they gave him community service. He had to do community service. He chose the airport near our house to do community service because they had, they needed stuff. And so he emptied trash cans and, all that at the airport. And he was thrilled because he was around airplanes. He was around pilots at the airport. He didn't care if he was doing, the janitorial work at all. So if it was a daughter, these days I would look, identify those desires they have, those talents they have as a daughter, and then just promote that, give lessons for that. So I just would do the same thing, I think. Yeah, it could be the same thing. Thank you, Deanna. Okay, so we have some other names for this age group. Some people have suggested that we could call this age group respected, maybe golden, the wise, golden ager, originals, gems. We could call us gems, age challenged. So there's a lot of different things that, terms that we can, I want us to be respectful in whatever we choose to call our older generation. And that's why I like classic and legacy. I think those are great. Classic Coke is what that reminds me of. So, here's what I would like for you to do on page 15 in your workbook. I'm going to give you 5 minutes and do this individually. We're not going to put you in a group, but go through this list on page 15 in your workbook and circle whether or not you strongly agree, undecided, disagree, or strongly disagree. And I guess if you don't have a hard copy of it, then you pull it up on your computer and just make notes on a piece of paper. So you have 10 questions here. So I'll give you about 5 minutes. And let me see, to pull that up and answer those questions. And I'm going to see if I can do a new share. Okay, so let's try to go down to these questions. See them. Yeah, here we go. So what do you think? So here they are on the screen. Okay, so
This is David. I had to step away for a while. This sheet that's showing,
yeah,
can we, is it accessible?
yeah, it's in the handout that I put in the chat box.
Okay, I don't see it.
Roll up in the chat box. There's several.
I got the social development stages.
No, okay, so they just put it back in the chat box again.
Okay, yep, just popped up.
You see it?
Yes, ma'am. Prevention.
Yeah, and this is on page 15 in that document.
Okay, got it.
Deanna, you're right. I agree. They are situational.
It sounds like some of my clients. It's situational. That's a cop out.
Patty, I like super seniors. I'm going to add it to my list. Okay. So we have a poll. We have 10 polls because we got 10 questions. So we're gonna, what I'd like for you to do, I think, let's see. Jessica, are you gonna put up the first poll?
Yeah, would you like me to put up the first question?
Yeah. Yes, please.
All right.
So what I'd like you guys to do is make your choice. Number one, only older adults who consistently drink a lot of alcohol have an alcohol problem. Okay, we have 10 people that haven't answered, but that's okay. We've been at it 1 minute, so we're going to close the poll and see what our answers are. So most of you said you disagreed. Many of you said you strongly disagreed. A couple of you agreed that only older adults who consistently drink a lot of alcohol have a problem. And the disagreement is probably because it is kind of situational. People who are recovering may, not need to drink alcohol at all. And so this is interesting, but most of you disagree or strongly disagree with this. Great. So let's put question 2 up. Over-the-counter medicines and alcohol can be used together safely. Oh, man. Okay, we're going to stop the poll. And it looks like most of you strongly disagree or disagree. Anybody want to make a comment on this question?
I just put undecided based on, depending upon the drug or the medicine being taken.
Okay, right. Yeah. And, how many times do you see well, this talks about over the counter, and do you see instructions that say don't drink with alcohol? Yeah. Right. So, all right. So question 3. If alcohol and medication misuse were a problem, the doctor would tell the older adult. Okay. Okay, so most of you said you disagree, or strongly disagree. So sometimes the doctor, doesn't even ask the question. Doesn't even know that they're using the extent that they're using alcohol. So yeah, we can't always rely on that, unfortunately. All right, question 4, age-related changes make older adults more sensitive to the effects of alcohol. Okay. Okay, I'm stopping the poll because you're correct. And I'm going to talk about this more in just a little while. Okay, and let's do number 5, and we probably will stop here for the sake of time. Very few women become alcoholics. Okay. Most of you disagreed or strongly disagreed with that. That's true. I'll talk about that also in just a second. So let me go back to, and we're going to stop that because for the sake of time, but hopefully it did give you some opportunities to think, about what some of the issues were with older adults. If we're looking at treating substance abuse problems, if we're looking at, is it easy to tell if an older adult has alcohol problem, etc. Do you just let them drink because it's their last remaining pleasure? So, thinking about some of these questions, I hope has made you, more sharp and more your information about issues that older adults have. Baby boomer brains. I was asked to do a presentation in Texas at the big conference, addiction conference in Texas. And I did it on, I called it Okay Boomer. Have y'all heard that phrase? Okay Boomer, issues of older adults with alcohol and other drugs. So, but what we know, and this sign says beer 30. Okay, guys, this is an actual picture in my brother's front yard. Okay, I told you I live in a retirement community. He lives out here. He lives on this block and there's a lot of alcohol. He lives on this block where the people like to socialize a lot. And so what they do, they have what's called beer 30. And if it's a nice weather and all, they'll blow an air horn, and that gives everybody on the block, when they hear this air horn, oh, somebody's going to host beer 30. And so that means bring your beer, bring your wine, bring your peanuts and your pretzels, and come to my house, and let's sit on the porch, on the deck, and visit. And so that's what beer 30 is. In my neighborhood, they call it wine therapy. And there's another one that calls it cheers. And so what this is about is, they have the sense of entitlement. I have worked all my life. I have deserved this retirement. And so I'm going to take it easy and drink or whatever. So we're looking at substance abuse. Oh, I need to change this to substance use, misuse. Among older adults, they don't have the family responsibility. They have income, they have entitlement. But they've lost children, jobs, spouse. They've lost identity. My brother was a Marine lieutenant colonel, and now that he's retired, nobody cares. Nobody salutes him. So it's sort of a loss of identity once you've retired and you don't no longer employ. And so there's this sense of immediate gratification in older adults and in older Americans. So the expectation of quick fixes for aches and pains, there's more prescription drug options, and they're being prescribed more prescription drugs from doctors, because as their health declines and various things happen. But I got to tell you, living here, my nephew, like I said, I live in this community, this retirement community in a county north of Austin, and my nephew was assistant district attorney in this county. And he came to me, and I live in Sun City, and he says, I hear that there are pot parties going on, a lot of pot parties going on in Sun City. Have you seen any? I said, no, but do you want me to go undercover? He's like, no, I don't. And so if you think about it, the people who live out here, the baby boomers, grew up in the 60s. Many of them smoked pot, okay? Not the pot we have today. This is like the 0.07% THC pot from the 60s. But they stopped smoking. They had families. They had jobs. 40 years, pass. Then they retire, and they think, you know what? I'm gonna smoke pot again. I really enjoyed that. And so, I don't know if they realize it or not, that the pot now is much stronger. So I was in a restaurant in this county, and there was a lady there who had a t-shirt on, and it said, pot, it does a body good. Just say maybe. And I was just, staring at the t-shirt, and I was with my sisters, and this lady saw me staring, and she came over to me and she said, I see you're looking at my t-shirt. I'm a recreational pot smoker, and I think that pot should be legalized. And if Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan knew the benefits of pot, he wouldn't have suffered so much. And I'm like, and my sister's patting my leg under the table to keep me calm, try to keep me calm, because I guess she could see my face was getting red. And first of all, Ronald Reagan had Alzheimer's, and that's not indicated for pot. But anyway, I said to her, I totally disagree with you. And she said, well, that's your right as an American. And she turned around and walked out. And I was wondering if she lived in Sun City and was hosting some of these parties that were going on. But sometimes this is the mindset, of baby boomers who want immediate gratification. So we're looking at the use of drugs among baby boomers is higher than previous generations. Okay. They use it more often than like the World War II. They use drugs more often than other generations. And so I want to show this to you because this is an interesting take on baby boomers.
Here's a baby boomer fact. Boomers in their younger years smoked more marijuana and did more illicit drugs than any other generation. For most, youthful indulgence was just that. But as they hit middle age and retirement, many of them are continuing to abuse drugs, getting arrested for drug offenses, and dying from drug overdoses at increasingly higher rates. Why is this happening? Experts are noticing some life experiences that many of these boomers who are developing drug problems have in common. Let's use a fictional character, whom we'll call Michael, to illustrate. So let's say that Michael was born in 1961. That makes him a late member of the baby boom generation, the 76 million Americans who entered the world over a nearly 2-decade period after World War II. Michael observes during his formative years many of his older peers who identify themselves as proud participants in a countercultural movement. its sensibility, anti-war, anti-establishment, and pro-experimentation with drugs. By 1979, he's a high school senior. He's among the 50% of his class who, according to a national survey, have used illegal drugs in the past year. It's the highest level of any graduating class before or since. 10 years later, Michael's wild child days have long since passed. He's working a 9-to-5 and the father of a new member of the so-called millennial generation. The years go by, and Michael, almost a decade away from receiving Social Security benefits, is having bad back problems. His doctors prescribed him Vicodin. He drinks as much as ever, and the kid's no longer around. He returns occasionally to his old pot-smoking ways. This profile makes him, based on case studies by experts, a textbook example of a boomer at risk. At risk of what? The rate of accidental drug overdose for boomers is higher than for 18 to 45-year-olds. In fact, more people this generation are dying from accidental overdose than from car accidents. Many boomers are also getting treatment for addiction. Are painkillers the biggest culprit? While prescription opioids sometimes act as a gateway drug, 36% of admissions to drug treatment centers by boomers are for heroin, followed by 22% for crack cocaine, 12% for opioid painkillers, and 10% for methamphetamine. Over the past decade, usage of illicit drugs by older people has risen steadily, so that by 2013, nearly 10% of 50 to 64-year-olds are using illegal drugs. The highest rate of illicit drug use is found among 18 to 25-year-olds. Shocker. But the rate of drug use by young people over the past decade has effectively remained unchanged. Why are older people using more illicit drugs? Experts say theirs is a generation with a predilection for drug use based on the experiences of their formative years. Which brings us back to our friend Michael. As he rediscovers mind-altering substances, he's finding out that his body is less able to handle them than it used to be. And if he keeps it up, 5 years from now, he may find himself among the 5.7 million people over age 50 who government researchers expect to need substance abuse treatment. That's the short answer.
Yeah, that's the short answer. So what we're looking at is nationwide, the baby boomer generation is just growing and growing. And so we're, and it talked about cocaine, heroin. Heroin is used when, you get your Oxycontin and then you don't get any more. Like I had surgery. Actually, I had surgery last week. My doctor gave me 6 tramadol. And I only took 1 after the surgery. So, but that's the thing. If I needed the tramadol and I couldn't get it, where do I turn to heroin? Because you can get that on the street and it's cheaper. I'm going fast because I only have like 6 more minutes. So we're looking at illicit drug use. It's declined after adulthood, but there are millions of adults age 65 and older with a disorder. And I've looked for the latest data that I can find is 2018. But we are in this middle thing. Problems related to alcohol use are currently the largest class of substance use problems seen in older adults. And very often alcohol is mixed with prescription drugs or over-the-counter drugs. Older adults have the highest suicide rate of any age group, greatest risk of men with presence of alcohol use and depressive symptoms. Age does change how alcohol affects the body. We have, the older we get, we have less body water, increased sensitivity, and decreased tolerance to alcohol. So we kind of flip with teenagers. They have increased tolerance to alcohol, and then decreased in the metabolism of alcohol in the gastrointestinal tract. Older adults are impaired under moderate dose of alcohol, but they don't perceive any impairment. And they're more sensitive to the negative effects of acute intoxication than adolescents. Very often adolescents are intoxicated. They don't show it. They're walking, talking. And then what really hits them, and they pass out, and it's too late at that point because people think that they're okay and they're really not. So adults experience sedative effects of alcohol more quickly than adolescents as well. women, face greater risk from alcohol because there's lower percentage of body weight. There's more fat, in a woman's body. And so they have can become intoxicated quicker than men. And the drugs of choice include alcohol, prescription drugs, cocaine, and marijuana. Opioid pain medications, medical marijuana, if it's available. They don't vape that much. Adults don't. They don't vape nicotine. Of course, they do smoke. They do use marijuana, and I'm looking at my list here, and alcohol as well. So these are the adult drugs of choice. So dangerous. Let me run this real.
It's long been known that excessive alcohol consumption can damage one's health, including effects on the brain and liver. New research led by a team at Penn Medicine discovered a surprising pathway that shows alcohol byproducts travel to the brain to promote addiction memory. After consuming alcohol, the liver begins to break down the alcohol, converting it into byproducts consisting mainly of a chemical group called acetate. Acetate, which circulates in our blood, travels up from the liver to a key brain region involved in learning and memory. Acetate then binds to proteins, packaging the DNA at important genes in neuronal cells. Once there, the team showed in a mouse model that the acetate governs how these genes are expressed and ultimately how behavior is affected when given environmental cues to consume alcohol. Blocking this pathway could be beneficial to selectively lower unwanted addiction memory in a therapeutic setting. This new potential target could provide physicians novel ways to fight alcoholism and addiction.
Okay. So how alcohol affects the body. Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome is wet brain, and it causes retrograde amnesia, anterograde amnesia, and confabulation. I'm going to go kind of fast because I want to get to risk and protective factors. Pharmacokinetics means that age changes how drugs are absorbed in your body and distributed and manufactured. The NIAAA looks at these guidelines, and I think, 1 drink a day for men, actually, and no more than 4 drinks on any particular drinking day are the NIAAA guidelines. Just saying, but now let's look at risk factors. For an older adult, personal loss, widowhood, separation, and divorce. Physical setbacks, limited mobility. So, whether you're using public transportation or not, or is it the inability to drive, slowing down, illness, declining health is a risk factor. Home life is a risk factor. So if you live with somebody with a spouse who drinks or uses drugs a lot, that's a risk factor. Tedium and boredom is a risk factor. Change is a risk factor. Loss of familiar roles, because you're no longer that Marine Lieutenant Colonel, you're not employed. Children moving away, new surroundings. So if you're moved into a retirement community, or otherwise, or if you're socially isolated, pain is a risk factor. Mental health is a risk factor. Mood disorders. We can't separate, depression, anxiety necessarily from substance use. Your self-image, because you've lost that identity of your job in your family, legal and financial pressures. But let's look at protective factors as well. So these are so important, and this is what we can do to assist and ensure that older adults have what they need, access to resources. And we've talked about that a little bit, access to care, housing, medical services, access to medical services, those linkages and support networks and social bonds, self-image. So, being known and respected in your community, supportive family relationships, health education. So just being informed about your health and how to use your medications and is important. Confidence, sense of purpose and identity. Sufficiency, so the ability to have enough income, to live independently, if you want to. And then personal development, expectations to thrive in good comfort, and good health and security. So these are protective factors for the older adult community. So we need to remember that the use of illicit drugs is lower than other adults, but it is increasing. And then issues with the body, as the body ages, we're more susceptible to the effects of drugs. Alcohol seems to be the issue for older adults, and so that's why they're admitted to treatment very often. It's never too late to quit using. And sometimes this last one, providers can confuse symptoms of substance use with other symptoms of aging. So there needs to be a thorough screening with substance use. This is a resource for you if you're interested. This is from SAMHSA, Get Connected. You can go, and this is a link to it. You can Google it or find that if you're interested in more issues with substance use. We're not going to do that. And finally, I love these guys. I can relate to these guys. We're living longer. People have longer lifespans. And so we're healthier, but then there are also those issues of living longer and deterioration of health and needing to look at substance use or drugs or legally prescription use of drugs. And so we need to be sure that we try to maintain health, continue learning to grow intellectually and participating actively in communities. These are the things that are really very, very important. So I'm right. I'm a minute over. Any questions or comments? You can put them in the chat box, or you can unmute and ask any questions about the presentation. I'm going to, so this is my email address, juliestevens49@gmail.com. I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica now, in case there's any announcement she needs to make.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And a huge thank you to Julie Stevens for such a great session. Please remember to take the evaluation on HUVA under this session, labeled Rate Session, and you'll find this at the bottom of your HUVA screen once you log out of Zoom. But if you haven't already, be sure to check out our sponsors and community section. The more you do, the higher your chances are for winning a prize. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to info@APNC. But yeah, that's all I have. Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful session, so we really appreciate you, Julie.
Thanks.